Hi Year 12, so I just filmed this whole video this morning and it was live, but for some reason my laptop decided to slow down my audio at a staggering pace and I sound mental. So I have had to delete the whole thing, take it down from YouTube, and this is the new video. Sorry if I sound less enthusiastic. I don't like repeating myself, but let's get it done. So this lesson is on spring, on page 70, but before we begin officially, I would like to begin our starter activity by exploding the question. I said before it's really important that you practice at regular intervals, exam style, section B Blake questions, so that you are exposed to as many as possible. So please write this in the centre of a page in your exercise book. In his poetry, Blake is always critical of man's impact on the world. To what extent do you agree with this view? Now, the last bit, remember to include the authorial methods. It's just a reminder that throughout your essay response, you would need to continually integrate author's method, so your extended metaphor, your juxtaposition, your use of contrast, imagery, etc. Really important. For today, you're going to write that question down and you are going to grab your highlighter and highlight the key words in the question that need interrogation. So in his poetry, Blake is always critical. So that phrase there, always critical, is inviting you to tap into AO5, which is your debate in the mark scheme. Now, a phrase like always seems rather sort of definitive, that idea that there is no other alternative. There is no other way of looking at this question. He's always critical of the way that man, aka humanity, impacts the world. Now, you know from On Another Sorrow and the activity that you did for me at the end of that lesson that that's not true already. Okay, he's not always critical. There are certainly models for joy, models for hope, for a balanced world, organised innocence, as he called it. So I already know I'm going to be highlighting that phrase and coming off with some notes with regards to potential alternatives to that idea. Now, that phrase critical, of course, we need to interrogate that as well, because there is certainly a strong criticism of the twin mills of oppression in his contemporary world. There is certainly criticism of parental figures, society as a whole with its damning infrastructures, of oppression. So we have to weigh this up. The examiner never wants you to completely subvert the question, to completely go against what's being suggested. He is certainly, at regular intervals on a consistent basis, critical of the way that humans create this world of experience and shame, inequality, prejudice, etc. You know what I mean, all those negative real world realities. But there's hope in this collection too. There are models for change. We see it in the poem we're about to read, Spring. We certainly saw it in On Another Sorrow and The Echoing Green. Okay, so some ideas for you already. The second part that needs interrogation in the question is that phrase, impact on the world. Now, what are the negative impacts on the world of these institutions of experience? Well, certainly one of them is a lack of creative imagination. A second one is certainly the lack of symbiosis with the natural world. And I could go on, there are many more. What I want you to do for 10 minutes now is to pause this video, that hopefully sounds normal, and to have a go at exploding your question. Loads of notes around the periphery, interrogating what each of those key parts of the question are asking you. You're not going to write this up. It's just regular 10-minute practice of typical A-level style essays. Okay, so pause the video, off you go. Okay, so the poem Spring, let me start by reading it, and then I will give you my key ideas, which you are going to annotate around your poem, and then we have one final activity today. So here we go. Spring. Sound the flute, now it's mute. Birds delight day and night, nightingale in the dale, lark in the sky, merrily merrily, merrily to welcome in the year. Little boy, full of joy, little girl, sweet and small, cock does crow, so do you. Merry voice, infant noise, merrily, merrily to welcome in the year. Little lamb, here I am, come and lick my white neck. Let me pull your soft wool, let me kiss your soft face. Merrily, merrily we welcome in the year. Now this is for me one of the strangest little poems. It is deceptively simple, once again, as an innocent poem. The lexical choices are very storybook. They have a song-like quality to them in the rhyming couplets and the refrain. But as we always know, the innocent poems, although on the surface deceptively simple, harbour a great depth of understanding. So as I've put there, I'm not going to read this out too much because I did this all this morning, but it definitely has the childlike, simple celebration, sort of unashamed celebration of spring and new life. And obviously the title evokes that, all the connotations of spring, new life, new beginnings. Although ephemeral, although not lasting, we've seen the recent cherry blossoms bloom and they were beautiful and then quickly die away and fall to fragments on the floor. You know, spring does conjure beauty, but also it's fleeting in its nature. That could be an allusion to the fleeting nature of innocence and childhood in Blake's era. Okay, so on the one hand we have this beautiful pastoral world, the harmony in nature, new life and the celebration of that, and then just in the background we're aware of that ominous sense that this is very fragile and ephemeral. So when you read this poem, it sounds just very much like we are celebrating the season. We have a very simple characters, the children, the birds, the lamb. But of course we know that there are far more sort of extended metaphorical readings of this poem. Now some critics have said that the poem could be read as an allusion to the sexual awakening, which actually this childlike poetic voice is largely unaware of. Okay, so especially in the second and third stanza, we have some lexical choices that allude to, the undertones of sexuality, some of the verbs and some of the images that are conjured. But the child is very much unaware of any form of sexual awakening taking place here. That's either a good thing, which means they're not self-conscious. This is a beautiful unself-conscious budding of sexuality that's really outside of shame. That's to say, should say shame. Sorry, there's a typo there. But it's also, unfortunately, about, once again, the vulnerability and naivety of a just innocent perspective, which we know is blinkered and thus limited. So in terms of structure, there are some key things we can talk about. It's almost entirely, about 70%, composed of rhyming couplets. So we've got sound verb flute, now it's mute, bird's delight, day and night, nightingale in the dale, and then just the last three lines fall out of the rhyming couplets. But I don't think the falling out of the rhyming couplets is to create chaos or disarray, but actually it adds to the song-like nature of it because we have the repetitions of the adverbs merrily, merrily, merrily. Life is but a dream. It reminds me so much of the traditional sort of storybook, childlike, song-like quality. So I think it all works together. And I've put there to emphasise the childlike nature of the speaker, the gentle symbiosis between humanity and nature. Okay, we've got the birds, and we've got the children, and the lamb, and the children. There's this perfect symbiosis. The third stanza, the last one, actually seeks to also reiterate the relationship between the child and the lamb, which we've had before, which is a trend in Blake's work. Now, there are positive and there are negative readings of this. We know that the lamb of God, thus Jesus, thus sacrificial victim. There are, of course, allusions there to the devouring of innocence within that biblical moment. But it could also just be something much more celebratory. You know, the relationship here seems to be a pleasant one, but, and there is a big but here, they have the potential to be destroyed due to their vulnerability. And I thought it was interesting to read this through an eco-critical lens, because we know here that the child sees the lamb as this beautiful creature and equal, but we also know as children grow older, they quite often consume meat, are led to consume meat, as is the societal norm. And as is the idea of anthropocentrism, that we as humans believe we are at the centre of the world, or at the top of the hierarchy that we ourselves have created. So what I'm getting at here is that the child is ignorant to, you know, what will be the change in his relationship with the lamb, and, you know, once again, innocence is deemed limited. So the key images and meanings are here. We've got the little characters and what they represent. They are universal figures. They're not just one girl or one boy or one bird. They represent the whole of the natural world and the whole of the human world. So yeah, more notes there. I'm not going to read through all of it. These are some key moments for you. I recommend that you pause the video here to get these notes down. I'm not going to read them all out again. I did before, but they're there here for you. They're pretty self-explanatory. So pause the video if you want to add these notes to your poem. And a few more. I do want to mention this one though, because this bit here, merrily to welcome in the year, once again we have the stress of unity, symbiosis, and it says here welcoming the new year rather than just the year. So again, that's quite complementary with the title of the poem, Spring, New Beginnings, a blossoming, a budding. So the title, the imagery and the language all work together here really well. A lot of you want to know, what's the big idea, miss? What can we take away from this in a summative idea? Well, I've said here, look, this poem is quite largely positive, okay, especially for an innocent poem. It seems more to be about celebrating rather than criticising in this one. The natural world and humanity are in a sweet state of symbiosis. There are looming threats, and we know there are. But despite that, there is a free, idealised pastoral world that is seen in this poem. And this is something the reader in Blake's contemporary world can learn from. Okay, this is a model for change. Pause now if you'd like to pop this down. Okay, so this is the last task. And I came up with this. I was inspired by the idea of the spool of wool, the idea, or thread, sorry, that you have this kind of continuing following through of ideas through a piece of work. And this is what they like at A-level, that you notice structural things, that this is something from the beginning to end. This is a continual sort of refrain, repetition throughout the work. And I think in Innocence, and you can see my key bullet points here, as a collection as a whole, there are some key aspects that are repeated time and time again. What I want you to do is to take all of these here, I'm not going to read them out, they're written down, and I want you to pop down the names of the poems that you think really carry these threads through. Most of them are positive, but of course the last one there, I've put the negative thread from Innocence, which is the naivety, blinkeredness, and thus vulnerability. I chose to get a bit creative with this. You might just do mind maps or lists, whatever you fancy, but if you're a visual learner, I envision the idea of the needle and the thread. And as you can see from this slide, upon the needle I have penned the Innocence aspect. So in this one it's the lack of oppression and binding, and along the thread running all the way through the collection there, I have popped in my favourite poems that I think illuminate this idea best. So you could do that for each of these aspects, your own needle and thread. I think it's a nice visual and a really good being kind to yourself for next year revision resource. I would love to see some evidence of this, please Year 12, so please email me your work once it's finished, and I'm praying to whoever's watching that this works and I sound like a normal human being and not a robot this time. So fingers crossed on this video. Have a good day.